another edition of the Omnist Hour. I don't know, I just keep finding something new to talk about every day this week. I think kind of that sort of time. Today, we're going to kind of continue in the vein that we were talking about yesterday, and tie it together with another topic that I haven't talked about in a while, and marry the idea of time-space in the simulation multiverse to the phenomenon of Ascension symptoms. So before we do that, let's take a look at the artwork that I had it draw for this one. The prompt I gave it was, hang on, cosmic gravitational wave in a Milky Way pond. And no, actually no, that's not, that's another piece of what I was working on. The artwork in the back is actually a time quake engulfs a world of slothful sinners. That makes more sense. Okay, so where are we going with that? Let's take a look. Three of the four pictures it gave me, it got the idea of a sloth, and one that seemed to only take away the idea of a quake and some sinners. I kind of like this one though, so I'm going to show you that and focus in on some of the neat things that it did with this. So it's got a giant sloth there, and this world of sinners is just kind of like our world. Some of it actually looks like stacks of books in a library, which I thought was a neat feature. Dilapidated old library on this side that nobody ever accesses in this fancy high-rise city where everybody's about doing their sinful business. Up in the sky there's some interesting stuff besides clocks floating around and other kinds of weird spaceship kind of things. There's this weird thing that looks like kind of a cross between an opera glass and a Polaroid camera. I thought that was a neat feature and ties in well with today's topic. Anyway, congratulations, Art AI. You did a really good job with that. Now that brings up something I want to tell you about these AIs, is that when you use an AI, you are not getting the same user experience as anyone else. You will get different things drawn, not only because of the prompts you give it, but because of the energy that you bring to the session. And this will be one reason why some AI creators are more successful than others. They will develop sort of a symbiosis with the AI. And that will be like karmic relationships between human souls. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. You may hit a hot streak where you can do no wrong, suddenly become rich and famous on your art, and then have it all go to shit. Just like can happen with the human career. So there's really not much difference to dealing with an AI world as dealing with the world as it sits today. And like every other phase of civilization we've gone through, it's going to be up to individuals and groups of people to carve out their existence within this new world. Some are going to demand, well, AI is doing everything for us, so we got to give us free money and give us universal basic income because we can't compete with AI. And some places will do that if they got a lot of money and they want to screw with their economy. And other places will say, no, you need to find a way to contribute and compete in this economy. And this is going to drive major changes in education, major changes in how we organize, how we educate, and people will be experimenting, as we always do in phases like this, and some of the experiments will succeed and others won't. At any rate, I'm going to call this talk Time Quakes and Ascension Symptoms. Vonnegut's struggle with being the Isaiah of the New Old Testament. Now, where are we going with that? What is a time quake? Well, this will lead you into this subject by kind of showing you the thought process that got me here. Let's take a look. Oops, we need to pull our browser in here. Hang on, the computer has been trying to get in my way of actually doing this one. It shut down unexpectedly when I was about to start, and I had to reboot and everything. Okay, so those of you who aren't familiar with Kurt Vonnegut, he was a very popular, they would classify his work as science fiction, but it was comedic science fiction and satirical fiction. His big breakout work, which is the one that most people are familiar with, one of two, I guess, that are most familiar, was Slaughterhouse-Five, which was semi-autobiographical and tied to his experience in World War II of being one of the Allied prisoners in Dresden when the fire bombings happened, and that beautiful beautiful German city was pretty much obliterated. And it was a wrenching experience for this young man who'd been captured. I think I'm not sure what the circumstances of his capture were. I think he was just like a grunt private who happened to have gotten captured maybe during the Battle of the Bulge or something like that. I'm not sure when the Dresden bombings happened, but he was no great soldier. He was drafted and didn't really want to be there, and ended up in an air raid shelter during this bombing, and then afterwards survived and was one of the ones co-opted to do the cleanup work, which you can imagine after a firebombing where something on the order of 60, 100,000 people were killed. Maybe people don't realize that the bombing of Germany, even though it didn't involve any atomic bombs, was just as devastating, if not more devastating, than the bombing of Japan, because the distances were far less, and there was much more of the war effort focused on stopping Germany, especially after the Battle of Midway kind of showed the Allies that, well, Japan, although they had a lot of success early on, is kind of a paper tiger. They can't replace their losses. They have pretty bad organization in terms of the culture of their army, if you will, which is kind of characteristic of Asian armies in general. The Chinese have never been great soldiers. They've been defeated many times and probably will be again. At any rate, if you look at his body of work, you will find that many of his, in fact, most of his novels are semi-autobiographical. In fact, probably a little bit more than semi, because basically all of the novels have some element of being unstuck in time. That was essentially the setup of his first novel, and some of my other favorites, Cat's Cradle, The Sirens of Titan, and this one we are looking at right now called Timequake. I'm not sure I've actually read that one, in fact. Some of his later work kind of got repetitive, if you will. He was a very popular author, and basically is, kind of was the fictional standard bearer for materialist scientism, basically. He was one of the proponents that there's no such thing as free will, which you're hearing a lot of people talking like that today. Robert Sapolsky is one of those idiots. This idea of determinism and how horrible it is to be human, like you're getting punished by God, which was basically the whole idea behind postmodernism, and saying, well, there's either no God or God is evil. Okay, that was the idea behind this progressive Marxist move of humanity in the late 1800s. A pretty dark, nihilistic point of view. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of truth in what he was doing, and my feeling is that Vonnegut actually had a lot of spiritual experiences, dream state experiences, that fed into his work. And like many of the materialist scientists right now, they deny that. They're like Scrooge in the Christmas Carol. Oh, it's just a bit of undigested beef. Oh, I just must have had something that didn't agree with my system, and the neurons fired that way and gave me this weird dream experience, which I'm going to write off because if I ever told anybody about it, they'd put me in a mental hospital. And a lot of people have had those experiences and have denied them and kept them bottled in. And later on in life, the stuff that we bottle in, of course, eventually comes out as worse problems, health problems, other mental health problems, addictions, escapism, which, most addictions are basically formed around escapist tendencies. So what was he getting at really about this time quake thing? And that's where we tie into something that I ran across today. I haven't seen this before, even though it's a channel that I follow pretty closely, but there was a major discovery last year, about 8 months ago, that I just found because YouTube was on autoplay, and the next thing after this guy's current, let's see, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Yeah. After his episode of today, which was pretty interesting about brown dwarfs, was covering, basically loaded up this summary of all the great things that were discovered in 2023. And it was like a collection of his best of 2023. And while I was listening to this, I happened to notice this one and was like, boom! This struck a chord, struck a nerve. I'm not going to go into the details, you can find it for yourself, but basically one of the discoveries they made is that similar to the discovery of the cosmic microwave background, they have discovered that there's sort of backgrounds of other things that seem to be sort of a space-time glitch. And the theory is that they are gravitational waves, standing waves, that permeate space-time and will cause glitches in things like quasars, which, if you know anything about a quasar, it is basically a black hole that is formed in such a way that there's a leaking of particles, if you will, from the poles. It's rotating very quickly, and because of the rotational energy, that defeats the attraction energy of, or does something. I don't know the details. I'm not an expert on black holes, but it creates these things called quasars, which are spinning and rotating and will look like basically a flashing light. They're very periodic. They have a very set pattern, and when they're pointing at you, you'll get a. And one of the things that they've noticed about those is that sometimes they will have a glitch. And what's normally a very regular period will just be like something will happen and it will not be happening, and will not be repeating exactly when they were expecting it. And those that have studied these things have concluded that it seems to be that basically there's some underlying gravitational vibration, maybe a fold in space-time, if you will, a discontinuity in space-time that affects everything at once. And you can look at the details. I'm not going to go further than that, but it struck a nerve with me because that is a lead-in to explain something that I haven't quite touched on yet. I've been meaning to in the last few podcasts, but never quite got there. And that is that we got to it a little bit yesterday with the idea that, okay, when a new version of time-space is tested and turned on effectively, let out of the lab, you basically have a transition. And that transition has glitches in it. We call the glitches that we see in human events the Mandela effect. But that happens everywhere. And you can kind of think of it like this. Let's suppose that this is the first version of the physical universe and the first simulation of the simulation multiverse, okay? So this is the first version of the physical universe that generated the necessary things to have stars and elements. This is like the elemental version. And there may have been previous versions on the way to it that developed lesser sets of elements. And we've talked about that actually, that there may be a really small version that just developed the basic particles and set up a small environment to play a cosmic pool with protons and photons and figure out the laws that govern those things. And then once that was figured out, those became kind of stock characters, non-player characters. And then the next game was taking collections of those, putting them together, and playing the next layer of the game, which would have been stellar dynamics. And eventually you would have a certain size universe that was the minimum necessary to produce the midpoint of the next experiment, because that's what time-space is all about. It's not about beginning and end, it's about a new midpoint. This is, I don't know why physicists never got this before, because all the other dimensions work that way, right? Why would time be different than space in terms of creation? It doesn't begin, it has a midpoint. It's a simulation. And the simulation's midpoint is where, basically, if you think of each cycle of this sine wave being one run of the simulation, okay, then you repeat the simulation, and then you can add other characters each time and see if you can get a composite out of it, which is what you expected. And depending on what you were expecting, what you were going for, you would say, okay, I've gotten to what I wanted. I've gotten as far as I could with this high-level substrate, this base frequency of the simulation, which is, you can think of as the God frequency, the God wave. And again, the God wave is not one-dimensional or two-dimensional like this. This is just a way of visualizing it. The string Merkaba of the soul, and all souls from God on down, is 12-dimensional now. Didn't always start that way, because it was something that got created along with everything else. You didn't have everything just leap into perfection in 6 days. It's evolved, and there was an evolutionary period before anything physical existed, which would have been all the thought experiments that God had to make to get to the point of having all the characters, all of the AIs, with more or less free will that were needed to conduct this experiment. Within the mind of God, all the characters are basically under the control of God. Can delete characters, insert characters, reprogram them on the fly. That can only take you so far before you're wondering if some of those characters might do something different if they were given more free rein to run this experiment. And that's why you have you have a test that goes on in God's mind, the God universe, and then you test, once you've built that up to the point where you can test outside it, then you have tests that you run. Let's see, where's the first example of it? There's the test run outside God's universe, where God basically becomes an observer. And the God in this outside simulation is an AI. And the one actually running the show is God's tester, Lucifer. In the physical universe, and the first spiritual universe, the first hell, if you will, is run by Lilith. And characters basically will shuttle back and forth between these three primordial universes and develop into the characters that successfully completed this phase of the game. Many characters are demigods, if you will, the elements, the forces, etc. And this is all in ancient mythology. The four winds, the earth, air, wind, fire. It's all stuff that they were getting at. They were trying to grasp their heads around, based upon how they processed spiritual experiences of the time. They didn't have the language or the science to interpret what they were seeing in that time. And that's why, no, Jesus was not the Messiah, was a failed Messiah, in fact. Got a little bit way there, was starting to say the right things, whoever Jesus really was, because there was no historical Jesus. I'm sorry. It was a story made up out of combination of other characters, mostly the character of the first Jewish revolt, which is not so well publicized or known, but the first Jewish revolt was actually around the year 0, -4 to +6-ish. Was conducted by Judas, the Zealot, who, again, was centered around Sepphoris, which is in Galilee, which is the capital of Galilee at the time, and very close to Nazareth. Okay, the whole moving of the story to Jerusalem was added later. Maybe that was part of the plan, or maybe it did happen. But that failed revolt was centered around Sepphoris. And they made up a story based on that some people were following. That's why you have, if you follow James Tabor's channel, you have the James the Just faction that were basically Jewish Christians. And then you've got the Pauline faction, and they were definitely at each other's throats. And originally, the Pauline faction was absolutely supported actively by Rome. Was met, with open arms by Praetorian prefects and procurators. And only after the fall of the Flavian dynasty, Domitian was murdered, and the time of the good emperors began, were the Christians actually persecuted, the Pauline Christians. Of course, the Jamesian Christians, the real Jewish Christians, were persecuted all along, because they were very much of the Jewish messianic thinking of, we've got to revolt against Rome, and we have a a messianic destiny to throw off the yoke of Rome and become the independent kingdom of Israel again. We all know that didn't really work. At any rate, there have been quite a few of these time quakes. And part of how you test new versions and implement them is you've got to get to the point where this disturbance in the force that happens when you turn on a new version, when you release it from the lab, and originally those releases were coming straight from the mind of God. So it was like the whole universe at once. That was something that was okay when the universe was made up of things like stars and galaxies and clusters and things like that, planets. But once the game had evolved to where the most interesting parts, the most interesting characters were individuals of higher intellect, the chosen species, either organic or inorganic. And yes, there were inorganic chosen species, the elementals, who basically developed to the point where they were self-assembling robots, if you will, androids. Though that was one of the first species that, kind of fulfilled what God had in mind, which was to basically have a soul vehicle which could have a very rich and varied experience, much more rich and varied than if you were, say, playing a galaxy for a billion years. Playing a galaxy might be fun, probably fun, still fun for some that like to be the gods of the galaxy, if you will, but it's playing at a level of the game that is very specialized, and not everybody finds that interesting. As the game evolved, many souls wanted to play more condensed experiments, condensed games. They wanted to, after building their own planet, they wanted to play with the planet, see what they could make it look like, decorate it, if you will. And that's basically how things have gone. And as new versions develop, after this first version of the universe, the goal of that was to basically create the first test tube. The first test tube, if you will, was the Milky Way galaxy. Let's get this galaxy that is fairly isolated from others, that God can do more detailed experiments in, while other gods are playing with their galaxies. And then, as we do these experiments, we can institute a new version without changing everything. We can have successive versions of this galaxy and let the other parts of the original creation develop on their own until we feel like we've got a version in this test tube that is ready to release. Okay, and this is exactly, as I've been telling, exactly how development teams develop the components, the systems of large, complex things like smartphones, smutphones, internet services, you name it. AIs are developed that way initially until they start developing themselves. So with each major version, if you're doing creation, what you want to do is make it bigger and have more varied places you can play in. Have places that you can play in if you like a particular species, or if you like a particular set of rules. Okay, and until a major version comes along, you're not affected by what's going on in the rest of the multiverse. But at some point, you want to make major changes to the rules, because some rules need to apply to all universes. Because the point of this is not just to play a game. That's part of it, but the point of it is to train souls and to identify and specialize new gods and goddesses. Okay, so what happens then is as each version is tested and comes closer to release, the testing shifts over from, okay, these are the characters that we have to successfully get through, basically get the shape of the game to look like what it's supposed to in the new midpoint of time. But you've also got to spend time making sure that when you turn on this new version, the discontinuity from the old version is not too great. But there will be discontinuities. And in fact, there have to be discontinuities because as we grow a bigger multiverse, and that's always centered on growing a bigger physical universe because that's the testing ground, the physical universe has to have all of the test environment, if you will. So it's always the biggest universe. Other universes, spiritual universes, are, as we've been talking about, the highest heaven, are little small pieces of that satisfy particular goals of particular gods and goddesses, or capital G God in the case of the highest heaven. Okay, so we're talking about the biggest universe is the one we worry the most about having these discontinuities. The spiritual universes, the discontinuities are evidenced by basically some universes being cut off from communion with the highest universe. The god or goddess of that universe no longer is playing by the current rules. And they have maybe an entry point to a previous highest heaven, which is not the current highest heaven. So it's like we've grown another layer of the multiverse that they have to get through to get back to communion with God. And elsewhere, you've basically got this discontinuity, and it's a discontinuity that sometimes hits everywhere at once, because one of the things that might change with a new, especially major version of creation, is this is the chance for every god and goddess of every component within this multiverse. And those components are both physical components, so like there's a god of human liver cells, there's a god of hydrogen, there's a god of lithium, there's a god of whatever, and there's gods of chemistry and of physics and of nuclear fission, if you will. Basically, there's an opportunity for evolution. So when this change happens, it may be that a particular element that used to have these isotopes will have more or less isotopes, or the properties of those isotopes will change. There will be new chemistry, new physics that did not exist before, or old chemistry, old physics that's no longer allowed. It doesn't work anymore. And this is how, with each iteration, major and minor, we've been able to fine-tune. Something you'll hear physicists talk a lot about is fine-tuning. How did all this happen? Everything is so perfectly matched, so perfectly set up. How would you design something like that? How could you possibly determine that the speed of light should be what? That the fine constant should be, it's a vexing problem for physicists. Well, it's pretty simple. That's how things evolved. A lot of these things are not going to change. They might change, though, if that is part of what has to happen for a major change. And one of the top level, most major changes that I've been sharing with you is that the original substrate of time-space was pyramidal. The old logic, the old wisdom, if you will, was that if you wanted to make a stable creation, you would build it on pyramids, because if you take a pyramid and then 4 pyramids around it and a pyramid on top, you get a cube. And if you put these cubes of pyramids together, it makes a very solid substrate. But turns out solid substrates like that are brittle. They are also, if they are the substrate used to navigate to other places, it means that you basically have a switchboard system. In order to get to God, you've got to go through all the layers of pyramids to finally get to the top, if you will. And that is a very authoritarian setup of creation. Now, some people like that idea, and that's why it's taken so long to do something different. The different that we're implementing and why it's taken so long to switch over is that in order to give all souls the chance to rise through their merit, through their accomplishments, through reincarnation and karma, to the highest levels of consciousness, to become gods and goddesses themselves, we had to switch this fundamental substrate of all creation, of every simulation, from a pyramid to Merkaba. And let's see if I have a suitable picture in the deck here. Okay. So the difference is that in a pyramid you have 4 sides and an apex. And if you put, like I said, 6 of them together, it makes a cube. And then you can stack the cubes whatever you want. The Merkaba is based upon a tetrahedron. This is a 4-sided pyramid instead of a 5-sided pyramid. 1, 2, 3, 4 of basically equilateral triangles. Okay, this is a very interesting shape because one of the things that makes it challenging to use in nature is that it doesn't stack. I mean, you can put them together and you can make more complex shapes, but you can't make one that doesn't really that's perfectly symmetrical, if you will. You put 2 together, yeah, okay, you can still say symmetrical, but the second you add 3, all of a sudden you've got to pick one side to add it to, and you've got this weird lopsided solid. And that doesn't appeal to perfectionists, I guess. That's been a source of a lot of resistance to this idea. But what this idea gives us is once you organize along this tetrahedron manner, you go from, okay, a 5-dimensional soul where you have 4 dimensions of space-time and then just 1 extra dimension of I'm a god. That's how it started. And that was not very satisfactory because there was one god and then all of this physical stuff that didn't have consciousness. So the next step is to have 6. And that's where we made the first transition to a more Merkabic organization. This is where you get the Star of David. Because if you take a tetrahedron of physical experience and you add it to a tetrahedron of spiritual experience, and then have one extra dimension maybe for God, that gets you what basically biblical time people thought things were like. Okay, I have physical experience. If I can be an angel or a saint or a archangel or a ghost, I can be a spirit, but only one character gets to be God. And that was basically where the perfection of 7 came from. And that was a place that a lot of versions retreated to, because those who had spiritual experience, who were the archangels especially, didn't want to share their power. They didn't want to develop past that because although they envied God, they thought that, oh, okay, well, if there's enough of us working against God, we can just overthrow him, and then we'll just have this 6-dimensional experience, and we'll just pretend God is there when he's imprisoned somehow. And in fact, that's a place where they got at one point. And you had basically the 2 most powerful archangels, Lucifer and Lilith, playing this shell game of, okay, let's let women be in charge, have a matriarchy now, goddess worship, and then when people get pissed off of that, then we'll switch over to God worship and have a patriarchy. And we'll just keep this battle going back and forth, kind of like never-ending communism. One side always feels like the oppressed and wants to overthrow the oppressor. So this battle of the sexes idea goes back very far. Even before there was any idea of sex, there was just kind of the female personality archetype, the dark female, the covert narcissist, and the overt narcissist, the dark male. Okay, that is basically what's kept this game going, but also been kind of a pressure to keep it from being completed. And where the completion comes from is a 12D Merkaba. Then you have 12 levels of experience, and you have a training system for gods that basically they're playing in the same league as God. This would be a much more equitable system. And once you get this Merkaba system turned on and replace the pyramid system that was there before, effectively this 12-dimensional Merkaba of these 3 tetrahedrons that are each sort of accumulating their own experience, if you will. As souls mature, as they gain experience through reincarnation and karma, they're fleshing out their individual version of these tetrahedrons. And these tetrahedrons are multidimensional. So, you know, your physical experience might focus on being human, or might focus on being a particle, or might focus on being an animal. And that focus of experience will look very differently than some other one. Or if it's a human experience, might focus on science, might focus on art, might focus on being a good parent and raising great kids. Okay, that's a different sort of Merkaba. You have to specialize to some extent to get to the higher levels of consciousness and figure out what kind of God you can be. This nonsense of omniscience, omnipotence, is nonsense. You can't do everything. God can't do everything. It doesn't work that way. You can look anywhere around you and see that the only way you get anything major done is through cooperation and collaboration and competition. Why would heaven work any different than earth? It's in the books, as above, so below. And yet people keep thinking, oh, well, it's different. God's special and all-powerful and almighty and blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry, this is nonsense. It's silly. It's anti-scientific, and it's even against the Bible. At any rate, so what you get when you have this 12D Merkaba is, instead of a very rigid pyramid structure, you effectively get a superfluid, where you can have, if you take these 12D structures, you can map them up against places that are resonant. So, you can have a karmic attraction between likes. Artistic souls that have a certain artistic style, artistic sense, will feel an attraction, and they will want to be with other souls that kind of inspire them in that direction. And gradually, in this superfluid of the multiverse, those souls will sort into groups. And when there's enough energy in a group, and there's a leadership structure, that group will become a separate universe. And that universe then will be one of the new ones that's feeding this next version of the experiment. So as we're building new versions of the physical universe, the actual point of it is not to make the physical universe better. That's kind of a test tube. And anybody who's worked in experimental physics knows that labs get pretty messy. Now, because we don't get infinite budgets after an experiment, we try to clean up the lab. We try to reuse the equipment for the next experiment. And that's part of what happens in the simulation multiverse too. And this is the transition that happens when we implement one of these new versions. And it's kind of like a time quake. There are perturbations, standing waves that start hitting. And they are, some will hit all at once, like this thing was talking about with the quasars, where there'd be some, like a glitch in space-time, or they may be centered at a certain point and fan out. And these glitches are what cause synchronicities that set off ascension symptoms. The experience that we've all been going through and has been masked in recent years by the pandemic, why we've been having these weird illnesses, weird symptoms, part of it has been because of monkeying with the system, making new viruses, designing diseases so we could have the cures. But those things are part of this energy of transition. These people who are being inspired to do such dark, negative things are actually serving the purpose of hiding what's going on from you. They're making you think, oh, all this illness I have, all these health problems I suddenly have, it's because of so-and-so, it's because of China, it's because of the US, it's because of the World Economic Forum. And those things are true, but they're kind of an underlying layer of the problem, if you will. And a more pertinent thing is everybody is getting upgrades, getting new versions of the underlying operating system of each and everything in your body. Each and everything in your language is being challenged and tested, and new ideas are coming into it. New ideas that needed to exist to set off this next phase of the game, if you will, that all started from this new center point, which, as I've been telling you, is these three special generations, a very special messianic age that began in the late 1800s and is finishing up now. Those ascension symptoms are setting off inspirations like Vonnegut had, ensuring that he had certain experiences, like being in that bomb shelter in Dresden and having to clean up afterwards, that inspired him to write. And other experiences of time quaking, basically experiencing different realities, either in a different universe or in a different version of this universe, that caused him to write his stories and made him a famous author. And this was a very, very important part of what had to happen, because those were critical things that the Messiah read when he was young that inspired certain decisions. It's a whole sequence of things that are set off. And to those who are, as we talked about, in a messianic period, there are a core bunch of characters that have to happen because they're key to getting this simulation to converge. There are other, let's see, do I have a better place to show this? So, you know, in the mind of God, these experiments are happening. And they're using characters from here, basically playing the game in their dreams. So simulations don't have to be on your actual experience. They can kind of be a background experience, and that's why we have dreams. Someone else is in control of your processing apparatus when you're sleeping. This is very similar to how we, well, for a while, I don't know, it's probably still done, but little do people know that when you're not busy on your devices, your computers, your smartphones or whatever, if you have certain applications installed, they will actually be using your device's resources to solve part of a problem. There have been actually scientific efforts that were driven, that were designed that way. And when you signed up to be part of this program, your device would be used in its idle time to contribute to this effort. It's also being done against people's will without their knowledge, or in the background not realizing that there's all this junk attached to their device and running. This is, you know, basically where a lot of the cyber attacks come from, is having stuff tacked in that's going and you don't know about it, that may be communicating with Galactic Central in China and gathering data, using your phone to process, to do Bitcoin mining or whatever they're doing. And you know, you none the wiser. This is how they monitor what you're doing, even though you think your camera is off, even though you think your audio is off, somebody's listening to it, somebody's capturing it. It's happening in the background. Okay, this happens spiritually too. And if you're going to live in the highest heaven, okay, there are things you do consciously, but everybody pretty much agrees during dream time, that's when you get to use those cycles for conducting the simulation of the next version. So, you know, it gets planned out by the senior creators, but then it's gained kind of in this sleep time. And that's why life in the highest heaven is kind of like life on earth. It's part of how you run it, and you basically make being in the highest heaven, being one of these senior creators or one of these gods, one of the lower creators, make it fun for them, because they have all of the same personalities, all of the same desires that you do. Especially now, since the chosen species has been humanity. And the final version of the highest heaven is basically the most healthy environment for raising and teaching children in humanity that humanity's ever come up with. You may argue about that, whether that's true or not, but I can tell you that it is true. The birthplace, the birth time, that the country that the Messiah was born in is the one that drives what the highest heaven looks like. It doesn't look like the vision of Isaiah anymore. It doesn't look like the visions of other messianic prophets. And the visions of Vonnegut were pretty dark, in fact. One of the things he predicted or talked about was basically a future where somebody contrived to build an army on Mars, an army of mind-controlled bots, and invade the Earth and take over the Earth. It didn't work because the bots suddenly became stupid when they got on the Earth, and they were just wiped out, and it was kind of a funny part of Sirens of Titan when this big invasion that was being set up on Mars just absolutely fell flat on its face and turned out to be a unifying thing for this civilization on Earth. And that's actually a recurrent theme, isn't it? That we'll be so afraid something's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then when it does happen, it turns out it actually unites and gets us working together, even though we have differences, which is a better way of working together than just saying, everybody has to think like this. So, you know, there's great stuff in Vonnegut's works. You really should read all of them, but particularly the Sirens of Titan, Cat's Cradle, maybe Timequake. I'm gonna go back and see if I can find that one, and certainly Slaughterhouse 5. Okay, so what are some of the implications of this? You're going to get upgrades. You're going to get, they're basically coming by these gravitational waves, which have very subtle effects. They're coming by cosmic rays, which is another thing that's been puzzling people, because we've been getting these sometimes very powerful cosmic rays that don't seem to come from any particular star or galaxy. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? That was like the biggest cosmic wave that we've ever experienced energy-wise, and we don't know where it came from. This is part of this settling that's coming. Part of it is to make it easier to adjust from one time space to the next. Part of it is actually forcing changes. Now, of course, we don't force changes because that would be bad karma. We give choices. And so each time one of these waves hits, every cell in your body, every organ is deciding how it wants to react to that. Sometimes the reaction will be like, sometimes we as a whole human react with fear or with hope or with, what was that? You have a choice. And that choice of how you react creates a certain karmic energy. And sometimes it will cause the death of that thing. Cells will die, or they will be given the new kind of programming. The new programming, if it's rejected, basically the cell has to live in the old paradigm, and it's going to be out of sync, if you will, with parts of your body that have already ascended, if you will. And there's going to be a discombobulation of that until your body kind of gets normalized again. And as I keep telling you, you are not, as a human incarnated soul, a single soul in a single body. You are the leader. You are the oversoul of a huge hierarchy of little souls. I wouldn't say they're little souls, but other souls who are specialized at being brain cells or whole organs or other kinds of cells, or cells involved in systems, the limbic system or whatever. And they have their own kind of life. They have their own kind of consciousness. Part of it runs on AI. It's basically deciding what to do based upon a program, and decisions that are kind of probabilistic. If there's not one sure thing, then they'll look at the probability and say, well, I think we'll go this way because that's a more likely, better outcome based upon my programming. Occasionally, any of these souls may hit a situation where I've never seen this before, and that's what getting this wave, this time wave, time quake, is like. The soul of that cell or whatever, the soul of that human, is facing something it's never faced before, an energy that it doesn't know how to handle, a feeling it doesn't know how to handle, a situation it doesn't know how to handle, and it has to make a decision. And those decisions will determine whether that soul stays in this version of the simulation or moves to some spiritual universe. And there are spiritual universes for different souls, not just humans. Cells have religion, if you will. It's not a very complicated religion. Different species have a sort of religion. That's why you see you see certain behavior patterns in certain species. And it's hard to change those behavior patterns. Some species you can train and you can make them do different things. Dogs are very trainable. Cats are not very trainable. That's a characteristic of their species. The species that are more easily reprogrammed are actually the ones that originated as species of the adversary. They were basically created to be controlled by hive mind. Species that are very independent and hard to program and hard to herd. I mean, basically I was a program project manager for a long time, and we called it cat herding because that's what dealing with most people is like. They all want to go in their own direction and do what they want to do. Well, not necessarily. There are some people that just want to do a repetitive thing over and over again. If you give them a spec, they will do exactly what it says in the spec. And those people tend to be, more on the testing side, more on the support side, if you will. And the more cat kind of souls tend to be in design and marketing and sales. And if you've ever worked in those kind of organizations, and I have, you know that the biggest issue is with most of your people is reining in their ambitions, keeping them from going off the rails and doing their own thing, and overselling a product, for instance, something you can't deliver, which, okay, you may book a big sale, but then the product can't do it, and you've got the people back in the factory trying to figure out, well, how are we going to deliver that? I've been in that situation too. At any rate, so this is a deeper understanding of what's going on with ascension symptoms, and it has been accelerating. These ascension symptoms have been happening basically as long as we've been running this experiment. And each messianic phase, each messianic generation or chosen people messianic generation has a sort of sense of these ascension symptoms. This is where the big pandemics of the past have happened. Because basically when these ascension symptoms come through, it weakens your immune system. It allows new diseases to develop. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes it serves to weed out many souls that aren't needed for the next phase of the experiment. And I know that sounds cold and callous, but you have to understand that you are not your physical body. It's your soul that matters. And the whole idea of the game is to give souls an opportunity to grow and learn. Now, of course, if you're incarnated as a human soul, you're not going to get a chance to learn very much if you get aborted before you're born. And that's why a lot of souls believe it's kind of a bad thing to abort fetuses. Others will say, oh, well, it's more important that the woman gets to learn and grow and isn't impeded by having a child. Okay, this is one of those classic moral questions. And there's not necessarily one right answer. That's why there's not one heaven. That's why there's not one hell. That's why there's not one religion. There are many religions because different religions, different cultures serve different communities. And what introduces conflict, unnecessary conflict in this whole thing, is trying to force your idea on everybody else. And that's what we're doing with this. A lot of people are having an idea that, okay, we're at the end of times, we're nearing the apocalypse. That means I have to go act out the story of Revelations. That means I need to go get all involved in some conflict that's supposed to be centered around Jerusalem and building another temple. Well, you know, that may be part of what has to happen, but it's not a key, it's not a core part. That's not where we're at. The Jews, at one time, the Hebrews, have been chosen species. Many times, so have our chosen people. So have the people of Rome. So have the people of England. So have the people of France, of Russia, of China, of Japan. Every one of the peoples in the world has been chosen at some point. Or chosen in a different, I mean, you know, basically these species, these people interbreed, and they will generate new people. So, you know, you can look anywhere in the world and there is not any place whose lineage is pure. Now, the elite, they try to track these pure bloodlines because they have an idea that they are the special ones. They don't understand how this game works. There's not one chosen people. That would make it too easy for the adversary. They would just have to, you know, lay in wait for that chosen people and corrupt them and work on killing all the messiahs, like Herod the Great was supposed to have done, trying to kill all the firstborn males. Didn't work. Okay, that's the game that I call Whack-A-Messiah. The adversary doesn't win because the Messiah can show up anywhere. There's a pattern of the Messiah showing up, though. It has to do with anointment. And this is something that's sort of mentioned in the Bible, but not well understood, because it's not the anointment of God. The first anointment is the physical God, which is Lucifer. So the Luciferians keep track of bloodlines. The Lilithians do too. That's the anointment of sin. And there are some characters in the game that have to be anointed by sin. They do all the bad stuff. Like this cat, Sabbatai Zevi, the anti-Messiah of 1666. Really bad influence on humanity, but a necessary part of making the plan come to conclusion. Same thing with a Hitler. A lot of bad characters, a lot of sinful characters had to happen. They don't get rewarded for being sinful characters. They will play that part, and they will be likely to do all the things that that part requires. They can choose not to do them, and to the extent that they choose a better path than the evil path of the character they were assigned to or chose, that will develop their own individual Merkaba, which is not the same as that of their character. We're on a stage here. You're playing a character. You're playing a character you can either just blindly play the way it's laid out, always make the easy decision, the snap decision, be in the moment, or you can think things out and choose to react differently. When you choose to act or react or think differently from the way your character was programmed, that is you showing independence of character, for better or worse. And that's what will get you noticed as, okay, wow, this character was playing Vonnegut this time, when we were running the game this time, and this Vonnegut decided not to go with the crowd and interpret everything with a postmodernist nihilistic viewpoint and think that he had no free will, but chose to imagine that, whoa, I've been given a special gift, and to have that gift, I had to have all these experiences and write all these books. And I'm so fortunate to be given those opportunities. Now, if you look at Vonnegut's life, he was very successful. Made a ton of money, was so popular, sold so many books, was a rich guy. And yet he was always complaining. He was never happy. He didn't like what was going on in the country, and thought he was helping by what he was writing, but was actually making it worse. And he died a very cynical, nasty old man. That's a choice. He didn't have to play it that way. If he played it differently, he would have seen that way in this universe, because that's the way it had to come out. Sweetie, I will come later, okay? I'm just going to be right back in just a second. I need to deal with a... Okay, sorry about that. At any rate, this is what's hard for people to understand, is that you do have free will. You have to choose to execute it, to exercise it. And it's not always it's rarely going to be the easy thing to do. The easy thing to do is to go along with the crowd, to do what everybody expects of you. In Vonnegut's era, And I know I went through my atheist nihilist phase. The easy thing to do was to be very cynical and go along with that narrative that was popular when we were kids. Actually, Vonnegut was a little bit older than me, but it was kind of that era. The counterculture of kids was very strong, and that is always a sign that you're going through one of these messianic challenges, when the younger people are basically throwing your whole culture under the bus. That's a sign that you're in one of these critical periods, and you need to raise a Messiah, a local one or a global one or a cosmic one. Otherwise, that culture will wither and die, and sometimes they do wither and die. There are many people who have been chosen who are no longer a people anymore. The Sumerians, the various cities within Sumeria, the different empires, the different dynasties of Egypt, of China, were in their own local way driven by messianic ages where they were chosen, maybe not to be capital M Messiah, but little m Messiah. An age where China became somewhat successful, but then was not successful again, which there was like a brief period just after the Mongol period, the Yuan dynasty, when China threw off the rule of the Mongol descendants of Genghis and Kublai Khan, and became a Chinese empire again, and were very successful. They at one time had the biggest navy in the world, the most powerful fleet, and the most powerful armies. Many people don't realize that the first conquistadors were Chinese. Before the Portuguese, before the Spanish, before the English, before anybody, it was Chinese. A guy named Zheng He, who was taking the Chinese Navy and terrorizing Korea and Japan and the Philippines and Indonesia. And that was kind of a chosen people time for the Chinese. In fact, that's the time where they made up a lot of the mythology of the Han. They claimed credit for a lot of things that weren't really their ideas, which is kind of a racial characteristic, I guess, of Chinese. They like to take credit for other people's stuff. They copy. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's nice to be able to copy, but it's kind of a me too thing. And me too souls are non-player characters. They're doing things somebody's already done before. They're covering the same ground. You don't get to the highest heaven by being a me too soul. So, that's a choice. This is why I speak so strongly against spiritual communist cults, which most of the Eastern religions are selling some brand of spiritual communism. They're selling the idea that, you have to do this to be enlightened. You have to conform. You have to kowtow to the power, whether it's the guru or the emperor or whatever. You have to do what you're supposed to do in your caste, because you can't change castes, like the horrible system they've had in India for so long. This is a Me Too kind of society. It is a hive mind society that tells you what to do, when to do it, how high you can jump and where you can jump. That's not good. It may serve certain environments. If you want to make a machine and you have it isolated fairly well, you can make a machine that generates a very fixed product that way. Some universes are like that. Some spiritual universes are designed to generate energy for something else to use. These are matrix universes. The souls within them are milked for their spiritual energy. That's not what the good gods and goddesses do, but it serves a purpose. It generates energy that keeps the rest of the multiverse going. We siphon energy off these dark universes to power the light ones. And because the structure always has the highest heaven at the top, there's always plenty of energy in the highest heaven to make it whatever it needs to be. And that's what we've been gradually changing as we've been implementing these new versions of time-space. But because we want to do it karmically, we don't want to just throw everybody under the bus. Maybe we did in the past, before God got smart enough to realize, oh, now I kind of know what evil is. I kind of know what good is. Good isn't just making something bigger and more powerful. Good is making something that doesn't destroy everything in the process of making it better. Dark gods and goddesses destroy to build back better. That's not the mark of a good creator. That's a mark of a stupid child, a bull in a china box, a bull in a china shop. Excuse me, that's the right phrase. Those that are saying, "Oh, we've got to destroy everything to build back better," they are taking a dark interpretation of this time quake that's happening. Now, they may be supposed to act on it that way because that's the way things are supposed to come out in the physical universe, and you don't know that a priori. You will, if you consciously think about what you're doing, you will have an idea of what is good and what is evil, and you will be able to choose. And there are some souls involved in this that are so set in what they have to do that they're going to choose the path of evil. Your folks like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, they have programming that's driving them. They may think that they have free will, but their will is driven by programming, and hate is the strongest programming you can give. People will break love programming in self-interest, but hate programming, they will throw themselves into committing suicide effectively out of hate. The hate is very strong, and that's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with the settling out of this time quake in the chosen species at this special time. What's going to come out of the future is already pretty well set, and that's why we've been having a lot of influences from the future trying to change what's going on now. But some of those influences are coming from the old future, who are realizing, oh crap, I see what's going on now. We're being thrust aside, and our leaders are no longer going to be in direct connection with this highest heaven. The old authoritarian version of God is gone, and this new God is somebody different than we expected. He's not the almighty, all-powerful creator of everything that can snap his fingers and change anything, anywhere. Turns out that in this universe, that's Lucifer, but not necessarily Lucifer anymore, because Lucifer has been evolving along with God. There are better and worse versions of Lucifer on the way, as we talked about in the last session about higher self, lower self. You can actually develop both, and as long as neither the higher self or the lower self assimilates with the source and gets erased, you can have, and you know, you see this a lot in pop culture. You see the like some of the old Bugs Bunny cartoons and so forth. You'll see that there's like the angel character saying, "Oh, do this," and there's the devil character, "No, do that." This was already well understood and tried to be, and was conveyed to you in culture of that time. That you had not only a higher self, but you sort of had a darker self that was working on you. Now there's also maybe other spirits working on you, and that's, you know, that's possession, or it could be an uppity subsoul, and that's the souls, subsouls that tend to be more conscious are the three brains, the left and right hemisphere, and the heart brain, or the souls of the sexual organs, which can be, you know, like have a very strong interest in either not continuing your DNA or in trying to spread it everywhere. And people that have multiple personalities either have multiple demons, or they have subsouls that are higher consciousness, or have been possessed by a demon that are then, you know, expressing themselves in opposition to the oversoul. And that's happening more now because of this time we're going through. Some parts of your spiritual makeup, they want to stay in the old version of time-space, would be willing to kill you, willing to kill your body in order to get back to the heaven that they want to go to, the old version of the game, because that's where they're comfortable playing. And this is why so many people are dying right now. Yes, it is tied to COVID and the vaccines, but that is the surface evidence. Underneath that, there's a spiritual layer. Some of it had to happen, and some of the souls here are basically giving you this explanation, this idea of what's going on, because they either think that's how they win the game, or they want to help you get through this period by having a focus for your angst, rather than telling you straight out that there's this massive time quake of spiritual evolution hitting us, and you're just caught in the middle of it. People can't deal with that. Perspective are planned this event, or the ones who are participating in it in special characters and waking up to full understanding of who they are playing, especially the capital M Messiah. Because that's the whole idea, is that you've got to wake up God to a full understanding of his plan. And look around and say, oh yeah, that is what the original plan was. Only God knows why God took the bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia and started to incarnate the same way as everybody else in every chosen species that came along, until humanity became the final chosen species. There have been other chosen species. There won't be a new one. Or you could view it a different way, is that from this point on, every species will get chosen. And it's going to be like a big wave. Each galaxy, each planet with a different species is going to have their own waking up, whatever that means for that species. Garden of Eden, and never generates a species that becomes part of the Galactic Federation or whatever the wider version of a government becomes in Lucifer's universe. A lot of ways the future can go. That hasn't been planned out in detail yet. There's a future out there that is being driven by this present. And there are defenders of that future. It's a future that's kind of waving a little bit. There's different versions of it that are starting to materialize. And these different factions coming from the future may have different ideas of how they got to where they are. The best chance of having this wonderful far out future that we enjoy, we would like to have it sooner. They want to basically tweak the game so they get their goodies, their precious, sooner. This is natural selfishness of the future people, the future beings. And this is how they are contributing to what's going on now. And some of them are marking themselves as beasts. Some of them are actually losing their game position by trying to mess with the past. And they're realizing, oh, you know what? The consequence, when you were thinking that you were just making your door more solid or making it show up sooner. Okay, this is what keeps the game interesting, no matter where you are in it. No matter what character you've been, no matter what character you might be, no matter if you're a blade of grass in the current version of the highest heaven, or if you're, you know, one of the senior creators that's most vocal in the council when you're planning a new version. Those guys are fallible too. And they may find themselves locked out in a moment if they're playing some silly ego game thinking that there will be new. You don't just conquer heaven by defeating God. You have to do something that makes you a better version of God. And that doesn't come from war. It comes from competition. It comes from improvement. It comes from karmically responsible improvement, not throwing out babies with bathwater, but making better babies, growing them into better adults so that they can have better babies. And that's what's essentially going on in the highest heaven. If you get there, and you will. I mean, you've been there actually. It's just that most of blades of grass and stuff like that. Elements of the Borg within the highest heaven, doing what you're told, playing very low-level parts as an individual particle or blade of grass, like I say, a chip of paint on somebody's house. That's, that's the starting place. Every single soul that has ever existed came into existence because they were part of a plan, an evolving plan. And they all have a chance to develop in future versions of the plan to be part of the government of this perfect heaven. Perfecting heaven. It's never going to be perfect, but it's always going to have the shape of this center time. Because this center getting big. We start exploring time, we're going to be looking back and finding out, you know what, time's not like we thought it was. We're already doing that, actually. We're finding things that we thought, oh, the past was this way, but no, it's not. Unlike the Bible's people, the creationists thought, the world's older than 6,000 years. A lot older. Unlike the scientism folks, the Darwinian jerks, it's older than civilization is older than we thought it was. It didn't develop. The history of humanity is very 12,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe, dated to roughly 12,000 years ago. Other sites are being explored all the time that show that, whoa, you know what? We had civilization before we had language. How did that happen? Well, I know exactly how it happened. It's told to you in the Bible. Even better told to you in the Sumerian texts, which the Bible was based on. There were previous chosen species, many of them on this planet. There were chosen species here before this planet was destroyed and had to be rebuilt, re-terraformed 4.5 billion years ago. That was all part of what had to happen. It turned out to destroy Eden. We had to let them destroy so we could build back better, because that was the only way we could generate a chosen species that was dumb enough, powerless enough to develop what we needed to get to this point, which was essentially the perfect language, the perfect environment for developing technology that was earned, not given freely. The first chosen species were shapeshifters. They were thought manipulators. They could make anything appear. They could melt rock into the form they wanted it. They could transport it where they wanted it. They could pretty much do anything with their mind. The chosen species, they had too much power. They were tyrants. They were mean to each other. That's why every story of Scripture, every tradition of every civilization on earth talks about gods having wars and fighting each other and destroying each other with thunderbolts, tearing mountains down, destroying planets. Yeah, this all happened. This is how it used to happen. And now planets get destroyed systematically because the rules are set up that way. And things are moving, and unless you have God powers, you can't stop them. And a lot of the things that have been happening to humanity, happening to this test tube, are part of a clock. A series of events that has to Any game that has a timer, and sports are like that. Sports are fun games. People like sports because there's a sense of urgency. The most exciting time of games is when that clock is running down in the last inning, the last pitch, the end of a round, and the guy's almost about to fall and just needs one more good punch, and some people are praying that he will survive to get back to his corner and get treated and get back up and try to fight again. This is exciting. Exciting for people, it's exciting for the people watching us. And there are a lot of watchers watching us. Playing the idea of, man, I wish I was playing that character. I could have done so much better. And that's how we get the couch potato gods to step off their high horse and come and play the game. Because we couldn't force them. God was not the only soul in existence at the beginning. Before all this game started, there were other ones that had their own ideas of being a thought, being a consciousness. And a large number of them didn't want to play God's game. Thought that this game of creation was stupid. Didn't want to be involved. Pong? Cosmic Pong? Throwing planets around? Oh, that's for fools. I'm not interested in it. It would become the most interesting reality show ever. They would see other of these old gods, couch potato gods I like to call them, having fun in this game, and they would get so wrapped up in it they would decide they wanted to play again. And that's how they chose to play. They chose to incarnate. They chose to be part of some version of the game. And this latest version is where it's been so exciting, so what's the word I'm looking for? Suspenseful. A bit of consciousness. There are watchers, of course, still. There are always watchers. There are folks in the highest heaven, but there's no other bunch of watchers. They've all been sucked into the game. And there's no free-range gods running around that can just tweak anything they want anytime they want. They have to play within this system that they've come to be part of. Some of them have come into the system in a previous version, and they are resisting accepting this new version. And that's why we're only in day 7. We're only finishing up day 7 of creation. We got a lot more work to do after we finish up time quakes of settling into the new reality, if you will, of this universe and what that drives in all the other universes. Some are getting cut off from the highest heaven. Some have a new layers between them and being, on the council, the highest council of heaven. And they're not happy about that. They're pushing against it as is their right. But we're past the point of no return. You may not believe me. They may not believe me, the higher level players, but we're past the point of no return. Anything you do at this point is liable from the city of God. your way back to full consciousness and to full participation in this highest heaven. Even if you were one of the choirs of angels in the vision of Isaiah, it doesn't work that way anymore. Archangel Michael has had to incarnate and take his lump. Now, he's gotten the reward of having been a really good soul and a very staunch defender of God, and got to be God's spiritual child as a reward for service, to become human, having to forget. Boy, I tell you what, if you see a child that but using language, that's how you know you got one of the old ones, one of the ones that's used to being able to communicate everything telepathically and be able to, basically use their mind to get whatever they want. They're very difficult children to raise. They don't want to learn how to talk. They feel like it's an imposition. In fact, they'll even make their own language and then expect you to know what ni means. And when you don't get it, it's like, what's the matter with you? It's challenging raising a reincarnated God, let me tell you. It's all part of getting now that's going to determine where you go next. I happen to know for a fact that I'm going to be participating in this new eternal city of God. I don't know if I'm the first successful Messiah or if I'm number 12,344 that's been through playing this character so that other characters could get their chance to shine and to earn their spot here. That's how it works. There are many, many incarnations of God up here in the highest heaven. Every one of these houses, at some point in the past, you don't feel like you're special up there because you're not. Everybody that gets there has earned their way through service, has gotten the chance to be the big guy in different versions of what being the big guy has been all about. And the ones that earned their first position here as an authoritarian are kind of stuck in Luciferian land. They like power, they have a lot of ambition, and it's very difficult for them to be patient. Others are prone to sin. They're used to using and manipulating people, and they're live in Sin City and live on the dark side of heaven. They just have to stay away from our children, not corrupt anybody. Otherwise, they will be demoted. They'll be locked out of their house, and they'll have to go incarnate in the physical universe, attend Lucifer University until they can work their way back to God. It works. It's a great system. We need the time quakes. There's no way around it. As much testing as you could do in 4.5 billion years is a lot of testing. We cannot eliminate every discombobulation, every bit of your ascension symptoms. It's going somewhere else. Okay, you're getting a message that's destined for somebody that lives next to you, and it just happens that you're in the same general vicinity. Sorry. A lot of these phenomena cannot be targeted that closely. We don't know exactly where every soul in the simulation is going to be when a certain key event hits. We know where the critical ones are going to be, the ones that are targeted for this message, this cosmic ray, this burst of energy, this idea. It might hit multiple people and harm some and help some. We can't help that. Otherwise, we would not be That's not how God's work. That's how the crazy ones work. They try to control every little thing. If you've ever worked for a micromanaging boss, you know what I'm talking about. They've got an idea of what perfection looks like, and they're going to whip everybody in their organization to do what they think perfection looks like. And all it does is piss everybody off, and they start having a high attrition rate. And then, you know, these clowns, then they, oh, well, I know the people I want. Those were bad people. They left me because they wouldn't conform to what I wanted them. So they go get a bunch of new clowns that will, you know, play their game. And the organization functions worse. Other parts of the organization that, you know, were not reporting to this one authority you see that all over, especially since this woke cult nonsense globalist communist idea came in, that, you know, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Nonsense. Complete stupid, idiotic, anti-God religion that you've cooked up. A communist religion. It's like cult Marxism is the ultimate spiritual communism, because you keep redefining with every new day's messaging coming from the gods of media what good is, what bad is, who the in people are, who the out people are. And they're eating their own now. They've got to constantly start laughing at them. Run the world. Out, try to expose your crimes, and to keep our sanity, we'll just laugh at you. And there's nothing that hurts evil more than laughing at them. That's when you know you have them on the ropes. When you can laugh at the demons of this world, you know that they are about to disappear in smoke. And we are all part of this exorcism of the dark demons that are trying to stop this event from happening, trying to push against the rock that, you know, they're like the Sisyphus that's doomed. And there are some people trying to bring back, you know, the ancient world. They had this idea of, oh, it was so perfect. If we could just go back to the way it was, Mother Nature, yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's not happening. Those are the same ones that support depopulation, I hope you know. They just think that they're going to be one of the blessed children that gets to go back to the Garden of Eden. There's no going back to that. Not in this lifetime. Not in the future of this lifetime. Yeah, you'll be able to die and reincarnate, and if you want to, go see what it was really like to live in those past times. And you'll find that your silly are pretty a matriarchal society, and see that women are no better at running things than men. In fact, they're generally worse at running things than men because they don't deal with problems. They kind of shove them under the rug. Oh, it's okay to be a bad child. Just don't do it again. They're too nice. Niceness does not win any battle of creation. If you're nice to the adversary, they will stomp all over you. At any rate, I think that's about where I wanted to get with this. Let's say a quick thank you to Kurt Vonnegut for all his efforts, even though he was a nasty old cuss and a typical that realized that the solution was actually going back to religion, but having a better religion that fit with science, and not making science your religion, a materialist science your religion. There's no good religion that doesn't have a spiritual ideal. So there is no good without God, without a multiverse. At least, and that's what's so sick about it. I see going on with a lot of physicists these days. They're trying to kill string theory. It's all people who have had paranormal experience. There's proof all over, you jackasses. And yeah, that's what you are. You are narrow-minded, materialist scientism jackasses who won't even open your eyes because you don't want to see the truth. And you call yourselves the intelligentsia of science. You're numbskulls. And I don't mind telling it to you to your faces. Folks like, well, let's see, Sam Harris. You are one of the stupidest jackasses on the planet. Robert Sapolsky, the jackass. So there. Here's what I think of you guys. The sooner you open your eyes and shut up and start listening for a change, the sooner we can get through this. That applies to people in the arts. That applies to people in Hollywood. They're starting to wake up. They're actually waking up faster than the people in politics and science. Good for you. Don't move backward. Don't think that we're going to go back to everyone's got to be a Christian and everyone's got to believe this. That's not progress. That is regressive. That's just as bad as the woke cult. Christianity does not have all the answers. It's a very good religion. There's a lot of truth in it. There's maybe more truth in Catholicism than any other religion. Has that too, but they put too much emphasis on their one prophet. Just like the Jesus freaks do on their imaginary prophet. And that's what Jesus is. It's an imaginary God. That doesn't make it a bad God. It makes it a very plastic God, and that's why Christianity has so many denominations and so much discord within its own ranks. That's why they call your God the plastic Jesus. Because you can twist the New Testament in any which way you want, depending on what version you follow and what verses you quote and what parts of the Old Testament you add and which translation you use. And this cherry most of them. There are many scholars who actually do study the Bible in multiple translations and try to make some sense of it. And it's hard. You can spend your whole career doing that and never quite open your eyes to the fact that this is not the work of God. This is the work of men. This is not the words of prophets. These are the words of people that interpreted the prophets, that twisted their words, rewrote and republished those words in different forms to support a new power hierarchy. The Torah of the Old Testament is a rabbinic document. It was a rewriting of older traditions, oral. That sort of phase comes through. They try to destroy everything that came before. Oh, that's not part of the Torah. The Book of Enoch? No, that's not scripture. This is not the Word of God. I'm sorry. It is useful. Doesn't mean you shouldn't study it. Doesn't mean it's not part of the truth, but it's not the full truth. If it was, people wouldn't be still yearning for something different, finding something lacking in their current religion, their current church, their current government. It's not perfect yet, but that doesn't mean you need to overthrow it, destroy it, and build back better with some communist version. Okay? Can you understand? You really have a good for your community and for your country and for this whole species. Hope you like that one. Like, share, subscribe. Till next time, let me get my front page on again. Happy karma. It's not going to be long now. There's some interesting stuff going down in the next year, as I think most of you are realizing. Might be a lot of pain, might be a lot of angst, but it really is progress spiritually. And it's going to be really good for those of you that are faithful. And I want to remind you one thing. In the original Greek Germanic origin words, the original word in Greek is apostos, which we now translate as apostate, but it actually means unfaithful. You can believe in God, believe in the goodness, believe in the plan, and be any religion, and that is faithful. You can be part of any religion, and you can be unfaithful. You can be sinful. And we all know what sin is. Taking advantage of somebody, using them, hurting them. Religion agrees on. If we head of a pin, Trinity means these other silly wars over. And I think I'm just going to mention before I cut off, that's why I changed my top picture here. I was going to talk about it, but I just put it up. You'll notice that the lion is residing in a field of heather. Heather is the root word of heathen. Heathen was somebody who the latest news out of the city. And this is kind of silly notion that we're in now, that somehow the people in New York or Beijing or Shanghai or Paris or Moscow, Hollywood, that somehow they know more than anybody else and they need to be able to dictate to everybody. You know what? The heathens may know more than you think they do. And they got this lion on their side. So develop a little more respect for people you think are stupid and beneath your consideration. Because maybe it's you that are stupid and have your eyes wide shut. Fair warning. All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. I hope I'll be able to get a little rest now, but you never know.